Hello knitters, this is Elizabeth bringing you a special episode of the Purled in Texas podcast. I'm going to show you my process for cranking a heel tab no-show shorty sock on my CSM. I'm using an Erlbacher Gearhart Speedster with a 60 stitch cylinder. I've already cast on with white waste yarn using my cast on bonnet shown here in the stripes and have weights hanging at the bottom. So let's get started. I start by joining and cranking one round of a ravel cord, which is braided fishing line. This will allow me to easily separate the finished sock from the waste yarn at the end. I use a clip to keep my ends tidy and out of the way. Next, I'll join my main yarn and then I'll reset my counter. The counter keeps track of the number of rows for each part of the sock to ensure that I make them the same size and also so that they fit, which is of utmost importance. I'm adjusting my end and then I'll place another clip here to secure the end of my main yarn. I'll begin cranking and I'll knit 10 rows for the top of the cuff. Then I'll start the heel tab like you see on an athletic sock. The tab is actually just a small short row heel. Next, I'll lift the needles in the back of the machine to take them out of work. This will allow me to knit the short row heel. With the back needles out of work, I'll next lift one needle on the side that I'm knitting from. On each pass I'll do this, and it will take that needle out of work. This is equivalent to doing short rows with wrap and turn in hand knitting. Downward weight is essential on a CSM. As I knit short rows, I can see stitches start to rise up on the needles, which means I need to add extra weight so I don't drop any stitches. These weights will add downward pull exactly where I need it to maintain tension and keep knitting properly. I use heel forks with weights to do this. To keep the knitting going properly and smoothly, I'll need to move the weights every so often so the distribution of the weight is in the exact right place. I have my cylinder marked with pink and green to indicate various things, such as my start of row, halfway point, etc. Once I have all of the needles out of work as indicated by my pink stopping mark on the cylinder, I'll start the increases by putting one needle at a time back into work on each side as I knit until I'm back at the starting point on the left. You'll notice that I'm also wrapping the yarn behind the needle brought back into work. This closes the gaps and gives me a nice polished decrease-increase line. On my final pass going counterclockwise, I'll pause to lower or bring back into work the remaining needles so that I can continue to knit the cuff again. It's key to make sure all of the needle latches are open so they actually knit and don't drop. I'll knit another 10 rows for the bottom of the cuff and then I'll start to hang the hem. A hung hem is actually like a folded hem in hand knitting. To hang the hem, I remove the weights and pull the tube up so I can find the first purl bump at the start of the sock. The contrasting white waste yarn and green ravel cord really helps me to locate it easily. Then I start hanging each purl bump around the sock with its corresponding stitch as far as I can get before having to crank around. The purl bumps will get knit together with their corresponding stitch and form the hung hem tube. I'm using a dental pick tool here with the red handle to help me grab the stitches. Once I'm about halfway around, I'll add my weights back and start to carefully crank around so I get to the second half of the stitches. I'll then also reset my row counter so I know where I'm at on the sock. I'll continue to hang the remaining stitches until I get closer to the start of the sock. As you can see, there are a lot of ends to keep out of the way. You have your waist yarn, your main yarn, the ravel cord. It can be a bit much, but there are some tricks to deal with it. Here I'm actually going to weave in my end by knitting over my initial tail, which will then tuck it into the hung hem tube. It's a great trick if you don't like weaving in ends. Basically what I'm doing here is wrapping that initial tail around every other needle. It will then get knit together with the stitch from the hung hem and its corresponding stitch. It won't have too much bulk because it's only done on every other needle. The final end just gets hidden, like I said, in the hung hem tube. Now that I've hung all the stitches for the hem, I'll crank 7 rows for the leg. The first row secures those hung hem stitches. It's only 7 rows for the leg because after all, this is just a shorty sock. Now I'll start to set up for my heel. I do a +3 deep heel because I have very high arches and this gives me the best fit. +3 means 3 stitches on each side past the halfway point. For the first row on each side of the heel, I wrap my yarn around 2 needles, which closes the gap up. Then I do short rows, just like I did with the tab earlier, only the heel covers a larger area. It will go to the halfway point plus 3 stitches for the deep heel adjustment. Moving weights around on a CSM is essential and can be tricky to figure out where exactly to put them. You know right away if you get it wrong though. After a lot of practice and drop stitches, I finally am getting a feel for it, although I do at times have mishaps. I'm finished with the decreases and now I'll start the increases by again putting needles back into work by lowering them one at a time. You'll notice that I put the first 2 needles down together at the start of the increases here. This gives me a more rounded heel which fits me better. On the final heel pass round, I stop halfway around. I reset my counter and put all of the needles back into work. Then I'll be able to crank the foot. Here's where we can really pick up the speed. On the final round of the foot, I stop halfway around and take my back needles out of work so I can knit the toe. The toe is done exactly like the heel, but only working with half the needles. You can't do a +3 here or it will cause the toe to be wider on the top than the bottom. We are almost there. On the last pass to my right for the toe, I'm going to put the last needle from both sides down. This is done because when I Kitchener later, I'll actually be adding a row to the top of the toe. Then I'm cutting a long tail to Kitchener the toe closed and switching to some waste yarn. I'll pause to put all of the needles back into work and crank a few rows of waste yarn to hold my stitches for Kitchenering closed later. Now I'll pull the sock off the machine. Then I'll locate the ends of the green ravel cord so I can pull and separate the sock from the cast on. Ta-da! See how easy it was to separate? If I hadn't used ravel cord, I'd have to cut the waste yarn and pull out sections, which is both time consuming and messy. Here's my tab, cuff, heel, foot, and toe, the finished sock. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed seeing my process. I'll see you next time in our regular episode. Until then, happy knitting.